Let's talk about what most people find to be the most anxiety-inducing part of software engineering interviews, the live coding challenge. What we're going to cover today are some tips and tricks about live coding challenges, and then I've created an example of a mock interview that I would give a JavaScript engineer if they were doing a live coding challenge today. I'm going to walk through that with you, give you time to pause, work on the challenge if you'd like, and then at the end, I'm going to explain all the answers to this mock interview. I've done a lot of interviews, both on the interviewer side and the interviewee side. And if you saw my recent video all about how I got laid off earlier this year, you know that a lot of those interviews that I did were this year. And I have to say, the live coding portion is always the scariest and most anxiety-driven part of an interview. As software engineers, we don't spend our days live coding with our peers. We're usually by ourselves without the pressure of someone watching us. Being interviewed in the first place puts you in a vulnerable spot, especially if you just got laid off. Can't relate. Yes, I can. Then put the pressure and the intensity of a live coding challenge on top of all of that stress and vulnerability. Honestly, can it get any worse? Let's walk through the typical structure of a software engineering interview. This is React and JavaScript focused, but really they're pretty similar when it's back-end or front-end when it comes to this structure. Interviews are typically between 4 and 6 hours, sometimes more, sometimes less. There's typically a knowledge-based, rapid-fire question and answer portion, a system design portion, a meeting with product and design in the company to assess your ability to understand UX and how important product is in a company, and of course, coding challenges. At times, there are take-home coding challenges, and other times you have this concept of a live coding challenge. You're typically paired with 1 or 2 peer engineers, usually on about the same level as you or above. These live coding challenges are typically between 30 minutes and an hour and a half. You're usually able to ask questions and use the internet. I really wouldn't suggest using Stack Overflow and trying to find a solution, more using things like looking up syntax for array methods, etc. Another really important thing to focus on is talking a lot throughout this interview. So as you're coding, as you're doing these challenges, talking about your thought process, because that's a really important piece of understanding if this engineer is a good fit for the role. Sometimes it's not really important that you got to the solution. It's more important that your interviewer sees your thought process along the way. Your interviewers know how scary and intense a live coding challenge is. They'll understand that you're stressed. If you are, of course. I definitely wouldn't hesitate to talk about these fears and about how you're stressed if that's how you're feeling, and really elaborate on, yeah, I don't do well under pressure situations, but I can talk through my process, do my best, and I'd be happy to talk more about other ways to show my skills, etc. There have been multiple times in interviews where I've done a live coding challenge, not really gotten to the solution, and then I walk out of that room and immediately I get the answer. And that's because the anxiety and the stress gets the best of you a lot of the time. I know that live coding challenges are so scary and so much pressure and so much anxiety, but there are ways to combat this stress. The first way is knowledge is power. Prepare. Knowing what to expect in an interview, researching the company, and researching your interviewers can really help ease that anxiety. And 2, practice, practice, practice. Mock coding challenges are ideal to help practice this skill. And that's where I've brought you to today. I've created an example of a coding challenge that I would give a React or JavaScript software engineer in an interview. Here is a live coding challenge that I talked about. If you want to go into the description of this video, there's a link to GitHub where you can clone this repo. Suggest starting in this mock-interview file. Talks about the instructions, and this is also where all of your JavaScript questions lie. There's 4 JavaScript questions, and I have tests written for all these functions, which you could run using npm run tests. So start with these JavaScript questions first. They're all using this dogs array that has all this data here, make the test pass, and then go into this React app. You start with this app.jsx file, go from there, read the instructions of exactly what you should be doing. You have 45 minutes to complete this live coding challenge. You can use the internet, but I definitely would say just stick to syntactical questions. You can definitely search MDN, etc. Don't just search for the answer. Really try and do it yourself and really push yourself and challenge yourself. One quick note is that I have all the solutions in this folder, but don't look at the solutions till after. Right after I unpause, I'm going to go through all the solutions to these problems. Maybe you'll consider pausing, putting 45 minutes on the clock, and trying this out yourself. And we are back after the break. I hope it went well. I'm going to go through all the solutions to these problems as promised right now. The thing I'm just going to do is just copy and paste this into the other file since my test file runs on this one. Okay. So the first one, using the dogs array, write a function returning an array of dogs 3 and older. The way we would do this would be using a filter. The important thing is, and where this could be a little bit confusing, is since we're using an object for dogs, one thing that might help a little bit is just to copy and paste one of these objects just into here. I'll just comment it out, but sometimes this is helpful a little bit just to look at the data, just to see what all the items in the object are named, etc. This filter goes through every item in the array and it checks for if the dog's age is greater than and equal to 3, and it will only return the dogs that are 3 or older. So that's the first one. The next one, the best solution for this is just a simple map. Side note, I have individual videos for all of these JavaScript array methods, so if you're stuck on one, filter, map, etc., I'll link them in the video description and you'll also see them pop up right up above my head. Definitely consider watching those if you're confused about any of these array methods, because they definitely will come up in any JavaScript interviews that you're doing. Back to our scheduled programming again. So in this, we're using a simple map. So what map does is it goes through every item in the array and you can rearrange it however you want. Whatever is returned for map will then be the new structure of that array. Here, we're going through every dog and we're just returning dog.name. So what this does is it generates an array of just those names, so just strings. For the third one, this one is getting a little bit trickier. It's not just testing your knowledge of JavaScript array methods, it's actually going a little bit more in depth. So this one says, using the dogs array, write a function returning the youngest dog. What I would do would just be sort the dogs array by age. And I have a video also about the sort method because it does get a little bit confusing. But what this will do is it'll sort from youngest to oldest. And then if you just grab the first item in that array, you'll be grabbing the youngest dog. And the last one is definitely the trickiest one of them all. If you didn't get the solution on this one, don't be angry with yourself. It's really a tricky one. Even though this one is definitely the hardest one, it's a great practice for any interview that you're going to be in. And this touches on the reduce method, which I do also have a video that I'll link up above about the reduce method. The way that reduce works is it uses the accumulator, and then the second item is the same as in all these. So like when you're mapping and you have dog, it goes through every item in the array, right? And reduce, it's a little bit different where you first have your accumulator, then the second item goes through every item in the array. The first time we come into this function, on the first dog, we have an accumulator of just this empty object, because if you don't set this second parameter, it will start with whatever the first item of the array is. But you can change that by using the second parameter, and I could start with anything I wanted. Say I wanted to start with the number 1, etc. Reduce is super, super handy like that. You can do tons of different things with it, and that's why we love it so much. So we're starting with an empty object. And then what this function does is it actually uses the spread operator, which is one of my favorite things, honestly. The spread operator allows you to just copy an object completely. And it's really handy in these situations because what this will do is it'll take all of the accumulator. The first instance of coming into this, that's an empty object. And then it'll tack on another item into that object. And if an item already exists in this accumulator object, you can actually override it by saying whatever you want to override it with. So if accumulator contains an item called corgi, it'll override corgi with whatever we're saying here. This syntax here is the way to use a variable to call out a key in an object. So this will say whatever breed here that we're in currently in this item in this array, we'll then go and say whatever the value that our accumulator holds right now. Say we've already counted 1 corgi, and we go into here and grab that value, and then we're adding 1 onto here. So if there's 1 corgi, we're adding another corgi, 2 corgis. But it also says that if this does not exist, then we'll start with 0. And that's how it counts up these different dog breeds in this array. Like I said, I have a video all about reduce. I know it's pretty confusing, so definitely consider watching that. There's tons that you can do with it, and it'll really impress your interviewers if you know how to use reduce. There's other ways that you can do this with like for each methods, etc., but reduce really is the best way in this situation. All right, and then let's cover our React app. So the first thing we're supposed to do is just show all of these dogs in this array. I've created a component called dog where we're showing those images, but first we're mapping through in this app.jsx file. So this here is a map within JSX, which will go through every item in the array and return a component for every one of those items. Inside of this component, we're passing down a key, which is important to be unique, and the name of the dog is unique. At least for this array. I mean, if we were doing this in a real project, names might be repeated, so I wouldn't necessarily use this as a key, but you can explain that to your interviewer. Talk about maybe how it would be useful to have IDs be better for this key. And then I'm passing down a prop for each one of these items, and that prop is called breed code. And that's the portion in that array that we'll be using to call our API. The reason why I broke dog out into a component of its own is really just best practices in React. You want to componentize as much as possible, break things down as much as you can, and that also would be helpful to explain to your interviewer. Another piece too is, since we're calling an API on every single component, it's really important also that we break these into their own components, because we have to call the API for every one, and it gets very messy to call all those APIs in their parent. We just don't want to do that. So let's go into this dot component. I've added a use state and a use effect for our data. So first, I set the state of data to null, and then inside of this use effect, this is the typical way to call APIs. I have a video all about use effect, but the way that use effect works is if you set an initial empty array, all that will happen is use effect will be called on the first render. If this array isn't here, it'll be called anytime state updates. But you also can add dependencies in here if you want your use effect to be based on any specific state within your component. The reason it's important it's called only on the first render is because you don't want your API to continuously call. You will get stuck in an endless loop, and that will be very bad. Another thing just to bring up to your interviewer that this is why you chose to do this. So the URL, I've just added a template literal, and I've put our breed code inside as a variable. And then I'm setting the data to JSON, and then I'm just updating this data state to this data.message, which is what we receive from the API for that image URL. And then in here, I added a little if statement for if the data actually exists or not, so that we don't have those gross empty images. And I say if data, return the image with the source of data, otherwise just return image loading. I can show you really quick what this looks like when it's up and running. It doesn't look good, and that is on purpose because this interview said nothing about style, and if I had extra time, I could potentially make this look pretty, but there isn't a need for it. If you have extra time in an interview, sometimes you're like, should I do something else? And they might tell you, yeah, you could do a little bit of styling if you want. So I'm just gonna quickly load this up. I'm just gonna update this to look at, and I'm just gonna run npm run dev. I've already run npm I on this project, so I don't need to do that. If I go into here, and there we go. We have our dogs loaded up for every breed that we have. The style doesn't look good, but that's not what's important. It's for every item in our array. And that is all of the solutions to this mock interview. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found it helpful. And if you are on the job hunt, good luck. And I'd love to help you in any way that I can. If there's anything that would be really helpful for me to touch on and make a video about, please don't hesitate to ask in the comments below. It's a hard year for software engineers, lots of layoffs. But at the end of the day, there's jobs out there and we can find them. If you're motivated and excited about what you do, it's possible. I believe in you. I hope that you believe in yourself. And I would continue to look for these types of examples of mock interviews and set this timer and try again. Keep going. If you didn't get it the first time, if you got stressed out, or maybe you need to brush up on your JavaScript or React skills, I have tons of different videos all about React, all about JavaScript that would definitely help you to brush up on before any of these interviews. So you kind of get ahead of the curve. If you feel very prepared, like you've studied and you know all of your core concepts well, it also eliminates the stress. If you like this video, consider subscribing to my channel. I make videos all the time about React and JavaScript and just the day-to-day being a software engineer. Thanks for being here.